December 1942. A grey French morning. The war has settled into a rhythm of thunder. From the clouds above, Melun, southeast of Paris, a wounded giant limps through the cold air, 4 engines coughing, black smoke trailing across the dawn. It's a B-17 flying fortress, the symbol of American daylight bombing power. But this one isn't going home. Inside, Lieutenant Paul Flickinger of the 303rd Bomb Group fights a losing battle. 2 engines gone, electrical systems failing, compass useless. With oxygen leaking and flak holes ripping through the fuselage, the fortress begins to drop. They've crossed the channel after striking targets near Rouen. Every man on board has seen what German flak can do, and they know capture means interrogation. So Flickinger makes a decision. He lowers the wheels and aims for open farmland. The B-17 touches down roughly, plows through frost and mud, and skids to a violent stop. The crew bails out, scattering across the countryside. Some hide with locals, others are caught within hours. But behind them, something far more valuable remains. A fully intact flying fortress, still bearing the scars of combat, yet largely undamaged. Within hours, Wehrmacht soldiers surround it. Photographers arrive. Then a black staff car. From it steps a Luftwaffe officer with a clipboard and an expression that mixes disbelief with curiosity. He circles the machine slowly, running his gloved hand along its riveted skin. "So, this is the American fortress," he murmurs. "Let's see if it truly deserves the name." That officer's report will soon reach the desk of Hans-Werner Lerche, the Luftwaffe's most experienced test pilot, the man who has flown everything from British Spitfires to Soviet Yaks. Within weeks, the captured B-17 serial number 41224585 is hauled to Rechlin Airfield, Germany's secret test center. There, under the code name Wulf Hound, the Luftwaffe will dissect America's pride. What they find inside will leave even the most confident German engineers stunned. Because this bomber isn't just a machine. It's a statement one that says the Allies aren't merely fighting to win. They're fighting to outbuild, outlast, and overwhelm. December 12, 1942. High above the French countryside, waves of B-17 flying fortresses thunder toward the city of Rouen, an industrial target producing parts for the German war machine. Among them is B-17 Farads, 41224585, known to her crew as Wulf Hound. She belongs to the 360th Bomb Squadron, 303rd Bomb Group, flying from Molesworth, England. Inside, 10 men, young, confident, exhausted. They've flown through anti-aircraft fire before, but nothing prepares them for what's waiting this time. As they approach the target, flak bursts blossom like black flowers around them. A hit smashes into the right wing, knocking out engine number 4. Another shell rips through the fuselage, wounding a gunner and shattering the radio set. Over intercom, Flickinger's voice crackles. "We've lost hydraulics. Number 3's overheating. She won't hold altitude." The formation moves on, but the Wulf Hound begins to lag. German fighters BF 109 seconds and 4 190 seconds pounce, peppering the bomber with cannon shells. The top turret gunner fires back until his belts run dry. Somehow, the aircraft stays together. Over occupied France, Flickinger realizes he can't make it back across the channel. His men could bail out, but several are injured. With limited control, he lowers the landing gear and searches for a flat stretch of land. Witnesses later say the giant appeared from the mist like a wounded bird. The wheels touch down on a farmer's field near Melun, southeast of Paris. The impact tears open the tail, but the aircraft remains upright, engines sputtering, wings intact. Villagers rush out, stunned. Some think it's a German bomber, others an omen. Within minutes, German troops arrive, rifles raised. They find no resistance, only a silent, massive aircraft sitting in the snow, its olive-drab paint streaked with oil. To the Luftwaffe, this is a miracle. An intact B-17, the enemy's most feared weapon, now theirs to study. Orders fly up the chain of command. A recovery team is dispatched. The Germans mark off the field, surrounding the plane with guards. Mechanics begin the delicate process of preparing it for transport. It's disassembled carefully, loaded onto trucks, and driven north under heavy escort. The destination, Rechlin Airfield, the heart of Germany's aviation intelligence network. There, behind barbed wire and hangars filled with captured Allied aircraft, the Wulf Hound will face its greatest interrogation yet. And when the engineers finally step inside, they'll discover something they never expected, not crude American mass production, but genius, hidden in simplicity. Rechlin Airfield, the Luftwaffe's most secretive testing ground. This was where captured aircraft came to be dissected, flown, and understood. British Spitfires, Soviet Yaks, even American P-38 Lightnings had all passed through these gates, but none of them had ever caused this much excitement. When the trucks carrying the disassembled B-17 Farads arrived, technicians and engineers swarmed the hangars like surgeons awaiting a patient. To them, this wasn't just a trophy, it was a once-in-a-generation chance to study the machine that had been hammering German cities in daylight raids. Leading the technical analysis was Hauptmann Hans-Werner Lerche, one of the Luftwaffe's most respected evaluation pilots. Lerche had flown almost every major aircraft of the war, both Axis and Allied, and his judgment carried weight even among generals. He walked slowly around the reassembled bomber, clipboard in hand, taking in the sight of this hulking beast with its 4 Wright Cyclone radial engines and its angular, almost utilitarian frame. The first thing that struck him wasn't beauty, it was purpose. Everything about the B-17 screamed function over form. He noted the solid rivet work, the sheer bulk of the fuselage, the modular construction. Even damaged panels could be swapped out quickly, something unthinkable in Germany's meticulously handcrafted production system. Where Messerschmitts and Heinkels required specialists and precision parts, the Flying Fortress looked as if it could be repaired by farmers with a wrench and a manual. Inside, the Germans were astonished by the level of organization. Every switch was labeled, every wire color-coded. The cockpit layout was intuitive, designed so that even under chaos, an American crew could operate it efficiently. Lerche scribbled in his notes, "Ergonomics' impressive design clearly anticipates fatigue and confusion in combat." But what truly made jaws drop were the defensive systems. Mounted at nearly every angle were 13 Browning, 50 caliber machine guns, heavy weapons capable of tearing through aluminum and armor alike. Each gun position had overlapping fields of fire, meaning there was almost no blind spot around the aircraft. The Germans mapped these arcs on a chalkboard and stared in disbelief. Lerche later wrote, "It is not a bomber, it is a fortress. One approaches at great risk, no matter from where." They inspected the Sperry ball turret beneath the belly, a marvel of compact engineering. The gunner, seated in a tiny rotating sphere, could aim with gyroscopic precision, powered by an electric drive. The tail gunner's position was equally formidable, a steel-walled cocoon bristling with twin, 50 seconds. Even the waist gunner's stations had heated suits and oxygen lines, luxuries German crews could only dream of. One engineer muttered, almost envious, "They fight in comfort, we freeze." The B-17 wasn't just well-armed, it was built with human endurance in mind. Every component, from the heated controls to the reinforced flooring, suggested that America's war machine cared about keeping its crews alive because it could afford to. When Lerche reported to Berlin, he summarized his findings in a single chilling line. "The Americans have built a machine for war, not for glory." The message was clear. The Luftwaffe could build masterpieces, but the Allies were building systems. And as Lerche prepared to take the Wulf Hound up for its first flight, every man at Rechlin waited to see whether this massive machine could truly live up to its name. When Lerche and his team completed the initial inspection, they moved to the firing range. The Wulf Hound's defensive armament had to be tested, not just admired. 13 Browning, 50 caliber machine guns, each capable of firing 800 to 900 rounds per minute. Together, that meant the flying fortress could unleash over 160 rounds per second, a wall of lead dense enough to shred any fighter that got too close. German engineers set up range tests using mock attack angles with BF 109 seconds and FU 190 seconds, flown by experienced pilots. Observers sat in the control tower, watching as tracer lines streaked through the air, mapping deadly patterns. What they found changed everything. Approach from the rear, and you face twin. 50 seconds from the tail. Twin. 50 seconds from the waist. Another pair from the top turret, and one from the ball turret. Try a side attack. The overlapping arcs meant at least 4 guns would meet you with converging fire. Even diving from above wasn't safe. The top turret and radio compartment gunners could swing their weapons high enough to cover the bomber's spine. One engineer joked grimly, "You don't attack a fortress, you besiege it." The firing tests revealed that an entire Luftwaffe swarm 4 fighters would need to approach with mathematical precision, from a blind spot lasting barely 2 seconds, to have any hope of scoring a hit without being torn apart. Even then, damage analysis showed how durable the B-17 truly was. Armor plating shielded vital positions, and self-sealing fuel tanks prevented fires from spreading. The hydraulic systems were redundant. If one was punctured, another took over. Lerche was fascinated. He wrote, "Its strength lies not only in its guns, but in its resilience. One can cripple it, but seldom destroy it." To the Luftwaffe, this was terrifying. For months, fighter pilots had complained of invulnerable formations of fortresses that chewed through attackers and still reached their targets. Now they saw the reason why. In one exercise, 6 190 seconds simulated a coordinated frontal attack. Even before they closed in, the nose turret and cheek guns opened up, forcing them to scatter. Out of 6 mock passes, only 2 could deliver hits on the cockpit before taking fatal damage in the simulation. Lerche summarized his report to Berlin bluntly. "The B-17 can fight alone. Even a single aircraft can sustain defense against multiple fighters. We underestimate at our peril." In fighter briefings across occupied Europe, German pilots were warned, never attack from behind. Never linger within 200 meters, and never assume a damaged fortress is helpless. But the Luftwaffe couldn't simply avoid them. The bombers were coming in ever-growing waves, hundreds, then thousands. They had to find a way to fight back. That task would fall to one determined officer, Hauptmann Egon Mayer, the man who would invent the only tactic that gave the Luftwaffe a fighting chance. Early 1943. The reports from Rechlin spread through Luftwaffe command like wildfire. Squadrons across occupied Europe were losing fighters at an alarming rate. Pilots described attacks on B-17 formations as suicidal. Even when they struck from behind, the return fire was a blazing storm of tracers. In some squadrons, the veteran aces refused to engage unless outnumbering the bombers, 3-1. Something had to change fast. That's when Hauptmann Egon Mayer, a battle-hardened ace of Kampfgeschwader II Richthofen, decided to think differently. He'd studied the captured bomber reports from Rechlin, including Lerche's diagrams of gun coverage, and he noticed something: a gap. The B-17's forward armament wasn't perfect. Its nose guns covered most frontal angles, but there was a tiny window, a cone of vulnerability right at the 12 o'clock position, head-on, during the few seconds before the top turret could swing forward. It was dangerous, almost suicidal, but Mayer realized that attacking from the front meant the closing speed was so high, the fortress crews had almost no time to react. He called it Frontalangriff, the frontal attack. At first, his comrades thought he'd lost his mind. Charging directly into 13 guns sounded like madness, but Mayer convinced them with logic. In 2 seconds, it is over. Either he dies or you do. But from behind, you die every time. In February 1943, Mayer and his wingmen tried the tactic for the first time over the French coast. 2 B-17 seconds fell in flames within a single pass. His squadron couldn't believe it. Soon, the 12 o'clock attack became the Luftwaffe's new doctrine. Pilots lined up head-on, throttled to full power, and fired a concentrated burst before rolling away just meters from collision. The results were dramatic. American losses increased sharply. The 8th Air Force, stunned by the new threat, scrambled to improve nose armament on future bombers. This is what led to the later chin turret addition on the B-17G directly because of Mayer's discovery. But even Mayer knew the risks. One mistake, 1 second too slow, and you flew straight into a storm of 50 caliber fire. He told his men, "Frontal attack is not for cowards. It is for those who do not intend to land." He personally scored more than 50 kills, many against bombers, and became one of Germany's most celebrated tacticians. Yet the same courage that made him deadly also sealed his fate. In March 1944, Egon Mayer was shot down and killed by escorting P-47 Thunderbolts over France. Ironically, it was a fortress formation that had drawn him into the sky that day, the very machine he had once studied to defeat. His death symbolized a larger truth. The Luftwaffe's brilliance could invent tactics, but not time. With every passing month, more bombers appeared, more escorts arrived, and the skies of Europe turned into a one-sided storm. At Rechlin, Hans-Werner Lerche and his colleagues watched these developments grimly. They had learned the secrets of the fortress, but they couldn't unmake the reality it represented. Still, the tests continued. Now, the Luftwaffe wanted to take things one step further. Fly the Wulf Hound itself not as a subject, but as a participant. When the Reich realized the value of the prize, they did what militaries always do with a trophy. They tried to make it their own. The Wulf Hound was cleaned, patched, and repainted beneath Rechlin's winter skies. Its American insignia removed, a German cross painted on its fuselage, and the code DL+XC stenciled near the tail. For a time, it belonged to Kampfgeschwader 200, the Luftwaffe's whisper unit, the people who flew odd jobs nobody else would. KG 200 was a ghost organization, infiltration, reconnaissance, even captured aircraft flown on secret missions behind enemy lines. The Wulf Hound fit their needs perfectly: large, intimidating, and with the benefit of masquerade. But its real purpose was less dramatic and more methodical. Rechlin pilots used it for training, drilling German fighter units against the very thing they would soon face over Europe. Pilots sat in its turrets to learn how the gunners thought, feel the cramped positions, and time their swings. Fighter pilots practiced head-on passes, measuring the milliseconds that meant life or death. Engineers took apart every system they could: radios, gyros, the hydraulic actuators that spun turrets with electric precision. The more they probed, the clearer one painful truth became. Germany could copy parts of the fortress, a turret here, a sighting mechanism there, but they could not replicate the scale of what they had found. The B-17 systems were not exotic, they were industrial. They relied on mass-produced components, standardized wiring, interchangeable parts, and factories organized like clockworks. Germany's industry, strained by blockades and shortages, did not have the spare capacity to convert to that way of building. At Rechlin, a senior engineer said something that worried even the proudest pilots. "We can make a masterpiece. They can make 1,000,000 shots." The Wulf Hound's presence in KG 200 was a double-edged sword. On public papers, it served as propaganda proof. German engineers were studying the enemy. In private, the men who flew it felt a grudging respect. Its cockpit was Spartan but durable. The crew compartments, while primitive by German standards, were laid out for survival. Once, during a low-level training run, a German pilot radioed back with an almost embarrassed tone. "It handles like a truck. It survives like a battleship." That phrase, truck and battleship, captured the divide in philosophies. German design prized aerodynamic finesse and high performance. The American approach prized redundancy, serviceability, and numbers. One took the best pilot and the best workshop. The other took an assembly line and a will to replace losses. From up close, Wulf Hound taught them about doctrine as much as hardware. The fortress demanded a response not of single acts of heroism, but of systemic change. More fighters, more fuel, more trained gunners and factories that could turn out tens of thousands of parts on demand. Germany simply did not have that luxury by 1943. And so, beneath the hangar lights, while crews logged hours in its cockpit and generals read reports about its armament, the most dangerous realization spread. The Luftwaffe could learn tactics, but it could not outproduce the Republic. By 1943, what began as an engineering marvel had become an industrial nightmare for the Reich. Intelligence estimates flowing into the Luftwaffe's headquarters in Berlin were grim. America wasn't just building bombers, it was building an air armada. Factories in Seattle, Long Beach, and Burbank were running around the clock. At Boeing, Douglas, and Vega, assembly lines stretched for miles. Each line worker focused on a single task, guided by blueprints and templates. No craftsman's touch, just consistency. Each week, dozens of new B-17 seconds rolled out, identical, reliable, ready to fly. In total, the United States would produce 12,731 flying fortresses before the war's end. That number alone eclipsed the Luftwaffe's entire fleet of operational bombers and fighters combined. Inside the Reich Air Ministry, reports crossed the desks of men like Adolf Galland, the famed fighter ace turned general. When Galland read the Rechlin report on the B-17's design, he was less interested in its weapons than in what it symbolized. He later recalled, "We could fight their aircraft, but we could not fight their factories." Each fortress carried more than firepower. It carried the weight of a nation that had turned its entire economy into an arsenal. If one was lost, another took its place the same week. If a factory was bombed, another state stepped in. German commanders noticed a pattern. Every time they believed they had reduced the American bomber threat, the next raid was larger. 200 planes, then 300, then 600. By late 1943, formations of 1,000 fortresses were crossing into German airspace, and for every aircraft the Luftwaffe destroyed, the Americans built 10 more. Galland's private assessment, shared only among senior staff, was devastating. "We are not losing the air war because of courage. We are losing it because of mathematics." The Rechlin engineers who once marveled at the Wulf Hound's complexity now saw the broader picture. The B-17 wasn't just an aircraft, it was a product of systematized abundance. Every component was standardized, every gun mount interchangeable, every bolt could be replaced from a warehouse thousands of miles away. German factories, by contrast, were being strangled by Allied bombing, raw material shortages, and labor crises. Skilled workers drafted into the army left workshops understaffed. Replacement parts took weeks to arrive. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, American factories were employing women, students, and retirees, anyone willing to help. The Wulf Hound had taught the Luftwaffe engineers many lessons, but this was the most painful of all. Industrial warfare had replaced traditional warfare, and the flying fortress was its perfect emblem. Every fortress in the sky was a message, echoing across the front lines. You can shoot us down, but you can't stop us. At Rechlin, Hans-Werner Lerche kept flying test sorties with the Wulf Hound. He admired its stability, its brute strength, even its logic. But every time he landed, he faced the same quiet conclusion: Germany could match its pilot's skill, perhaps even its tactics, but never its scale. By mid-1944, the captured B-17, the once proud Wulf Hound, had become something of a legend at Rechlin, and within Kampfgeschwader 200, the Luftwaffe's most secretive special operations unit. Few outside its hangars ever saw it, but stories circulated through mess halls and flight schools alike. The Americans' fortress that now flew for Germany. Its olive-drab paint was long gone, replaced with Luftwaffe markings and dull, grey camouflage. The code DL+XC shimmered faintly on its tail, but technicians still called it by its original name, the Hound. Inside, it smelled of oil, cordite, and a faint trace of burned rubber from its first rough landing in France. The aircraft's assignments shifted constantly. Some reports place it in mock combat training, where German fighter pilots rehearsed interception tactics against an authentic fortress silhouette. Others suggest it flew limited psychological operations, sorties approaching Allied formations before breaking away, sowing momentary confusion. And then there were the whispers, those impossible to confirm accounts that Wulf Hound flew clandestine missions under KG 200, dropping agents behind enemy lines or testing long-range navigation equipment over the Baltic. Whatever the truth, its flying days were numbered. By the summer of 1944, the sky over Germany belonged to the Allies. Rechlin itself came under repeated attack, its hangars shattered, its runways cratered. The German technicians fought to preserve their data sketches, firing arc charts, structural analyses, all based on the fortress they had once disassembled like a giant puzzle. In August, an Allied raid struck an airfield outside Oranienburg, where Wulf Hound was reportedly stored. When the smoke cleared, the bomber was gone, twisted aluminum scattered among other wrecks, its serial plates melted, its name erased. No one bothered to rebuild it. By then, there were thousands more B-17 seconds crossing the Rhine every month. The Luftwaffe had no fuel to spare, even for its own fighters. After the war, Allied investigators combed through captured German files. In a battered folder marked Rechlin U.S. Aircraft Evaluation, they found meticulous diagrams of the Wulf Hound's gun placements, ammunition feeds, and electrical systems. The final page, unsigned, carried a single remark in German: "Technically magnificent, impossible to duplicate under our conditions." That was the Wulf Hound's epitaph, not written in marble or steel, but in the quiet admission of a defeated engineer. For historians, the aircraft remains a symbol of paradox, built to destroy Germany, yet preserved by it long enough to teach the Luftwaffe what industrial war truly meant. The fortress they had studied so carefully would soon return in thousands, blotting out the very sky it had once landed beneath. And though its wreckage disappeared into the ashes of Rechlin, its lesson endured. No fortress is invincible, except the one built in factories too numerous to bomb. When the fires of Europe finally dimmed in 1945, the story of the Wulf Hound slipped quietly into history. No parades, no headlines, just another piece of wreckage lost in a sea of ruins. But among the engineers and pilots who had seen her men, like Hans-Werner Lerche and Adolf Galland, she left an impression deeper than most battles ever could. The Luftwaffe had captured many Allied aircraft during the war, some impressed, others disappointed. But the B-17 was different. It forced them to confront a truth that pride had long concealed. Germany's mastery of precision could not match America's mastery of production. At Rechlin, engineers who once believed in technological superiority found themselves studying a bomber that was, by their own admission, simpler yet more effective. Where they used alloys and tight tolerances, the Americans used stamped panels and assembly line logic. Where they chased perfection, the Americans built redundancy. And that difference, invisible on blueprints but undeniable in results, reshaped the entire war. For the Luftwaffe pilots who flew against the fortresses, there was grudging admiration. They'd call them Eisenfestungen, iron fortresses. Even as they cursed their firepower, they respected the crews who manned them. The endless streams of aircraft that replaced the fallen, they realized that behind each bomber was not just a factory, but a nation, millions working in unison, unrelenting, unstoppable. Hans-Werner Lerche, after the war, admitted in an interview, "We did not lose to better aircraft, we lost to better organization." And perhaps that was the most profound revelation of all. The Wulf Hound didn't just change how the Luftwaffe fought, it changed how they understood war itself. Because war, by 1942, was no longer about the daring of individual men or the elegance of design. It was about systems, about nations capable of feeding machines faster than the enemy could destroy them. The Flying Fortress embodied that reality more perfectly than any other aircraft in history. As for the Americans who built her, they never knew the quiet reverence she inspired inside enemy lines. To them, the B-17 was simply a workhorse, loud, heavy, stubborn. But to those who faced her, who watched tracer fire glint off her wings and disappear into the clouds, she was something else entirely, proof that freedom could be manufactured at scale. And in a way, that was her greatest victory. She didn't just defend the crews inside her, she forced her enemies to respect the power of what they were truly fighting against. When the last report on the Wulf Hound was filed, one line stood out, written by a German engineer who had worked on the captured aircraft from its first arrival to its final flight. "No matter how often we tried, we could not break her. And in that, we learned why we would lose." The Flying Fortress had lived up to its name not only in the skies above Germany, but in the minds of those who once believed they could bring her down.